My name is Anan. I'm 81 years old, and there is something I carried for most of my life without ever understanding its true power. It was not a teaching. It was not a technique. It was not a scripture or a prayer or a ritual passed down through generations of monks. It was silence. But not the silence most people imagine when they hear that word. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet room. Not the pleasant stillness of an empty temple. I am talking about a different kind of silence. The kind that strips everything away. The kind that shows you what you have been hiding from. The kind that does not comfort you at first, but corners you, exposes you, and then, if you stay long enough, begins to heal you in ways nothing else ever could. I ran from that silence for decades, and the day I finally stopped running, everything I thought I understood about peace, about wisdom, about myself, about life, quietly fell apart, and something truer took its place. I was born in a small village in northern Thailand. Life there was full of sound, not city sound, but life sound. Animals, rain on the roof, voices arguing, children crying, pots banging, wind shaking thin walls. Our house was never quiet. My father was a man who filled every room he entered with his presence. My mother was always working, always moving, always responding to something. Silence in that world was not a gift, it was a warning. When my father went silent, something was wrong. When my mother stopped speaking, trouble was close. When the house fell quiet, it usually meant someone had died, or someone was about to be hurt, or something terrible had just happened. So I learned very early, deep in my bones, that silence was not safe. Noise meant life. Noise meant normalcy. Noise meant things were still moving. But silence meant danger. I carried that belief into every part of my life, even into the monastery. When I entered temple life as a young boy, I expected peace. I expected calm. I expected that the silence of the temple would feel different from the silence of my childhood. And in some ways it did. The outer silence was gentler, more ordered, more intentional. But the inner silence, that was another story entirely. Because the moment the world around me became quiet, the world inside me became very loud. Memories surfaced. Fears I had buried came back. Old pain that I thought I had outgrown returned with startling clarity, and I did not understand why. I thought spiritual silence was supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like exposure. And here's what I didn't understand then. Silence does not create pain. It reveals it. Everything I was feeling in the quiet had already been inside me. The noise of life had simply been covering it. The constant activity, the responsibilities, the conversations, the routines, all of it had been acting as a kind of shield between me and my own inner truth. When that shield was removed, I came face to face with what I had been carrying all along, and I was not ready. So I did what many people do. I ran. Not out of the temple. I ran inside the temple. I became the most useful, most busy, most occupied young monk I could be. I swept floors that were already clean. I carried water no one had asked for. I organized shelves that did not need organizing. I volunteered for every task, every errand, every duty, not because I was devoted, because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. Afraid of the quiet. Afraid of what lived in the stillness when everything else fell away. And for many years this strategy worked. I appeared diligent. People praised my effort. No one suspected that beneath my activity was a boy, then a man, who could not sit with himself in silence without feeling as though he were falling apart. But silence is patient. It does not chase you. It does not scream. It simply waits. And one day, eventually, your running gets slower than its waiting. That day came for me much later than I would like to admit. I was already past my 50s. My body was beginning to slow down. My energy was not what it had been. The tasks I used to fill my days with were becoming harder to sustain. And slowly the shield of activity began to thin. The noise I had relied on for protection began to quiet, and what was underneath began to surface again. There is a Zen story that I heard many years ago, and at first I thought it was just a beautiful tale. But later it became the most important teaching of my life. The story goes like this. A student came to a master and said, "I have studied many teachings. I have read many texts. I have practiced many techniques, but I still have no peace. What am I missing?" The master did not answer. He simply poured tea into the student's cup. He poured and poured until the cup was full, and then he kept pouring. The tea spilled over the edge, onto the table, onto the floor. The student shouted, "Stop! The cup is already full. Nothing more can go in." The master stopped pouring and looked at the student calmly. "You are like this cup," he said. "You are so full of ideas, beliefs, opinions, fears, and knowledge that nothing new can enter. To receive true understanding, you must first empty yourself." When I first heard this story, I nodded politely and filed it away as an interesting metaphor. I did not understand its real depth. But decades later, when silence finally caught up with me, I understood. I was full. My mind was full of noise, memories, judgments, identities, expectations, self-images, old pain, future fears. There was no room left for peace. Not because peace was far away, but because I had filled every inner space with something else. Silence was the only force patient enough to show me this. You know what surprised me most? Silence did not fix me. It undressed me. It removed layer after layer of what I had been using to protect myself from the truth. The identity of the disciplined monk, the image of the calm elder, the story of the man who had overcome his past. All of these were real in some way, but they were also coverings. And silence, when I finally stopped running from it, gently peeled them back until I was left with something I had almost never encountered directly. Myself. Just myself. Without role, without performance, without explanation. That was terrifying at first, because without all those layers, I did not know who I was. I had built so much of my life around doing, achieving, serving, performing peace, performing wisdom, performing composure. And when silence took all of that away temporarily, I felt naked, vulnerable, almost invisible. But something happened inside that vulnerability that I did not expect. I began to breathe differently. My chest opened slightly, my shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched. And for the first time in perhaps my entire life, I felt something I had been chasing through every other means. Stillness. Not the kind that comes from control, the kind that comes from having nothing left to defend. There is another Zen teaching that became deeply meaningful to me in this period. It says, "Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of everything, undisturbed." I had always thought silence was about removing sound, but true silence is about removing resistance. It is about stopping the inner argument with what is already here. It is about letting life be exactly what it is without adding commentary, judgment, correction, or fear. When I stopped fighting what was inside me, when I stopped trying to make the inner world behave according to my wishes, a different kind of quiet appeared. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of acceptance. This changed the way I meditated. Before, I had always sat with a goal: calm the mind, focus better, purify the thoughts. But after silence had truly met me, I began to sit differently. I sat to be present, not to achieve. I sat to witness, not to fix. I sat the way a river sits inside its banks, not forcing anything, not going anywhere, just being. And in that being, something deeper than any effort could produce began to emerge. A stillness that was not mine to create. It was already there. It had always been there. I had just been too loud inside to notice. The power of silence is not what it gives you. It is what it stops taking from you. It stops taking your peace through unnecessary thought. It stops taking your clarity through constant inner noise. It stops taking your presence through mental time travel into past and future. It stops taking yourself through identification with every passing fear, every passing judgment, every passing emotion. When all of that stops, even briefly, what remains is something very simple and very free. If these words are reaching somewhere real in you right now, if something in you is recognizing itself in what I'm saying, then maybe this is the right moment to stay close to this space. Because many people hear the word silence and think it means doing nothing. But true silence is perhaps the most courageous act a human being can commit. It means stopping the run, facing what has been buried, and trusting that what you find beneath the noise is not something to fear. It is something to finally welcome home. This understanding also changed my relationships. Before, I needed to fill silences with others. A quiet moment between two people made me uncomfortable. I would speak just to avoid the gap. But after I befriended silence within myself, I began to see that silence between people can be one of the most intimate things that exist. Two people sitting together without needing words. That requires trust. That requires presence. That requires the ability to be without performing. I had never known that kind of closeness before, because I had never known that kind of inner quiet. As I grew older, silence became less of a teacher and more of a companion. Some mornings I wake and the first thing I do is listen, not to birds or wind or temple bells, to the silence itself. It holds everything, every joy I have felt, every grief I have carried, every question I have lived with, every answer that came slowly. Silence does not separate these things. It holds them all, without preference, without hierarchy, without explanation. And in that holding, there is a peace deeper than any thought can describe. There is one more Zen image I want to leave you with. A master was once asked by a student, "What is the meaning of true silence?" The master said nothing. He simply sat. The student waited. Minutes passed. The student grew restless. More time passed. The student opened his mouth to ask again. But then he stopped, because in the waiting something had shifted. The noise in his own mind had quieted, not because someone silenced it, but because there was finally nothing to feed it. No question to chase, no answer to demand, no identity to defend, just presence. And in that presence, everything he had been looking for was already there. That is the power of silence. It does not give you peace from outside. It reveals the peace that was always within, buried under decades of inner noise. You do not have to earn it. You do not have to deserve it. You do not have to become someone else to find it. You only have to stop running long enough to notice that it has been here all along, waiting for you, quietly, patiently, the way only silence can. Today, at 81 years old, I still sit in silence every morning. Some days it shows me old things. Some days it shows me nothing at all. Some days it simply holds me the way a mother holds a tired child, without needing to explain, without needing to fix, just holding. And that is enough, more than enough. It is everything. If these words touch something inside you today, then stay with this feeling a little longer. Do not rush past it. Do not immediately fill the space with another thought, another task, another distraction. Let the silence that these words may have opened remain open, even for a few breaths, because sometimes that is where the deepest change begins, not in the doing, in the pausing. And if you want, tell me in the comments, when was the last time you truly sat in silence? Not the silence of a quiet room, the silence of not running from yourself. I would love to know. And if this message reached you in a way that felt real, stay close to this space, subscribe, and leave a like. Because somewhere out there, someone else is still running from the very silence that could save them. And maybe your presence here helps this message find them at exactly the right moment.